So the Holy Year of 2025 has been given the theme of hope by Pope Francis, Pilgrims of Hope. A number of reasons why he chose that theme, considering the situation of the world at the present time. There seems to be a loss of the desire to transmit life, a loss of the desire to keep the human race going. That sounds very extreme and concerning, but that's his observation. And he feels maybe people have lost the joy of living, that the joy has gone out of living for many people for all kinds of reasons. He refers in the letter in which he announced this Holy Year, he refers back to an encyclical letter by Pope Benedict XVI, his predecessor, which is a beautiful reflection on the theme of hope, issued in 2007, but still well worth reading and meditating on. First thing Benedict does is he says, well, hope is not exactly the same as progress, it's not exactly the same as evolution, it's not simply history. There are some pages there that are philosophical, thinking about those other concepts, and he's trying to distinguish Christian hope from those other concepts. And he says the important thing for him is that Christian hope involves persons and their freedom. So the person of God, the persons of human beings, the freedom of God, who is the Lord of history, and the freedom of human beings who are making their decisions and so on in the course of their lives. So he feels that none of those other concepts, although they sound like something like hope, are actually what we want to talk about, that Christian hope is something more again. So that's the first part. Second part, he calls three witnesses to hope, and they're coming from places that seemed hopeless. One is a Vietnamese cardinal whom he knew. Pope Benedict knew this man personally. He had spent something like 13 years in a Vietnamese prison, many of them in solitary confinement. And then when he was released, came to work in Rome, wrote beautiful things about prayer and hope, and about prayer as a school of hope, a place in which we learn hope. A second witness, again it seems like her life was hopeless, was Saint Josephine Bakhita, who was a Sudanese woman, kidnapped and enslaved. And she spent many years as a slave and was severely beaten at times in those years that she was a slave, but eventually was adopted into an Italian family, continued as a servant in the family, and eventually became a sister in a community in Italy, and lived a humble life, we can say, but a very holy life, and impressed people with her goodness, with her love for God and for other people. And Pope Benedict is very impressed with this woman as well, Josephine Bakhita. He quotes a lovely expression from her in which she says that she is convinced that she is definitively loved by God, and that this love is awaiting her. And because of that conviction, my life is good, she says. So then the last part of Benedict's encyclical is about how do we learn and practice hope. And he points to three experiences which we have in which we learn and practice hope. The first one is prayer. Like the Vietnamese cardinal had said, to pray is to express your hope. If you didn't have hope, you wouldn't pray. And if you do pray, it's a sign that you do have hope. So that's the primary exercise of the virtue of hope, is to pray. And in the course of our praying, we deepen our hope, our trust in God. Hopefully will deepen as we persevere in prayer. Another experience that comes to every human being sooner or later is the experience of suffering. And again, it's a challenge. The witnesses he calls are all people who lived through very difficult circumstances and experienced great suffering. But in spite of that suffering, they found a way to continue to trust in God. They learned hope in the midst of suffering. And we do that basically by seeing our sufferings against the sufferings of Christ, or in the light, against the background of the sufferings of Christ, in the light of the sufferings of Christ. And we believe that if we can associate our sufferings with his, then we're contributing. As St. Paul says in one of his letters, we're contributing in our turn to the salvation of the world. And the third experience in which we learn and practice hope, he says, is to think about judgment and to think about the final judgment. Why does he say that? He says that because there's much unfinished business in the world. There are many injustices that are never rectified. There are many innocent people who lose their lives, suffer greatly, and they never have justice done to them. And it's one of the main reasons why belief in the resurrection of the dead came to the centre, feeling that there must be another moment in which God will ensure justice for those who have suffered very profound injustices. We don't like the word judgment. We don't want to be judged by anybody, but the Christian belief that Jesus is to be our judge is actually very good news. And we should hear the word Jesus rather than the word judge in the first place. Jesus is to be our judge. And who else would you want to be your judge? He's completely truthful, completely just, but also completely merciful. So these are the three experiences in which we learn and practice hope: prayer, suffering, and judgment. So Pilgrims of Hope is the theme for the Holy Year of 2025. For the reasons that I've given, Pope Francis decided we need to think about hope. We need to place it at the centre. And so the recommendation of him to the whole Church is that we meditate on this gift of hope, this virtue of hope, and that we pray for that virtue in preparation for the Holy Year and during the Holy Year, and that, please God, we will grow in that virtue as a result of our celebration of this Holy Year.